Hello and welcome to Agri History. Today we will talk about pears. Although pears are commonly consumed as a fresh fruit, historically it was also consumed in pies or cakes, and alongside strong cheese, carpaccio, risotto, jams, or mixed with ice cream. The genus Pears, of which pears belong to, came from Western China in the Tertiary period. The pear has a range of northern Italy, Switzerland, Germany, Greece, Yugoslavia, Moldova, Ukraine, to the east in countries such as Iran, Uzbekistan, China, and Japan. From a commercial standpoint, pears are divided into two separate sections: the European pears and the Asian pears. The current explanation to the origin of the pear genus is that the pear genus was an allopolyploid created from the mixing of two ancient Rosaceae forms. The families used to breed this new genus included, according to this paper, Spirea doi and Prunus doryae, the former encompassing many spirea and spirea-like plants, and the latter covering cherries, plums, and whatnot. This hypothesis came from the fact that the former family has 9 chromosomes and the latter subfamily has 8 chromosomes, which add up to 17 chromosomes, which is what the common pear has. Current isoenzyme studies seem to suggest that this is correct. The origin point of pear seems to be the mountainous regions of western China. Since many relatives of the pear exist in this area, it is plausible that the common ancestor to all these Rosaceae crops was widely distributed throughout this area in the ancient past, possibly the Cretaceous or Paleocene era. There are 2 domestication centers of origin for pears. The primary origin of the genus Pears is first located in China, and the second is located in Asia Minor to the Middle East in the Caucasus Mountains. There's also a secondary center of domestication in Central Asia. The number of species cataloged of pear varies from author to author, from 20 to 75 species. There are 23 wild species cataloged in Europe and temperate Asia, as well as the northern mountainous regions of Africa. Pears are categorized into 3 groups. This is based on the number of carpels and fruit size. Small fruits that have 2 carpels are known as Asian pears. Large fruits with 5 carpels are the European pears. There are also species with 3 to 4 carpels that are hybrids of the fruits mentioned above. Many of the species found in pear are hybrids between other species, so it is unknown how many species are actual species and not just regular hybrids. This is due to the fact that pears can interbreed with each other very easily, including between species. In pear production and breeding, there's been plenty of historical crossbreeding that played a role in the domestication of pears. In the European pear, the current hybrids and varieties of pear seem to be a fusion of wild populations of wild domesticated pear mixed with another species called Pyrus caucasica and Pyrus nivalis. Modern cultivars seem to have several other species incorporated into the germplasm. Several other species incorporated into the germplasm. Pears elacifolium, Pears silicofolia, and Pears syraca. The common Chinese pear seems to be derived from Pears usuceraris and Pears pyrifolia. One of the common hybrids often grown in China seems to be a resulting crossbreed between Pears butulifolia and Pears usurensis or Pears pyrifolia. Although recent studies seem to suggest that the hybrid is actually an advanced form of Pears pyrifolia. The European pear came from the Caucasus region, which ranges from the Caspian Seas to the Black Seas, and have been cultivated for at least 3,000 years. In Asia, various Indo-European tribes spread pear as they migrated throughout Europe, alongside northern India. The earliest mentions of pears was 1000 BC by Homer, when he referred to them as gifts of the gods. According to Theopratus, 371 to 286 BC, pear production was a common practice in ancient Greece, where their cultivars were propagated by grafting and cuttings. By the time Pliny the Elder came into being, 23 BC to 79 BC, at least 35 cultivars of pear were being grown in Rome, while only 3 apples were noted. The range of fruit traits of these ancient cultivars were similar to those grown today. In the Middle Ages, pears were widely grown in Central and Western Europe. Cordus, who lived 1515 to 1544, described pears in Germany that had all the fruit traits possessed by modern cultivars, with the exception of buttery texture. In the 16th and 17th centuries, France was the most prolific pear breeder and pear producing country. By the early 1800s, there were 900 cultivars of pear growing in France, most of which were crisp in texture. In the 18th century, Belgium became the center of pear culture and improvement, and bred the melting buttery fleshed cultivars that we use today, like the Bosc, Anjou, and Winter Nels pears. Now when it comes to the history of improvement of Asian pears, you have to go to China. The domestication of Asian pears began 3,300 years ago, with commercial orchards existing in China for more than 2,000 years. But pear breeding did not begin in China until 1956. In Japan, pears were cultivated as early as the 8th century, but large plantains of this pear species did not appear until 1868. Kikuchi began the first breeding program in Japan in 1915, which is still active today. Next, we'll talk about pear breeding in North America, including the Jesuit Pairs. In Canada, there are a group of trees called the Jesuit Pairs. These were established by missionaries from France. The trees produce a large number of tiny, sweet, and spicy flavored pears, more round than pear-shaped. And these trees have fruit that ripen in mid-August. Due to the lack of commercial character traits found in common pairs, found within the Jesuit Pair group, the genetic potential is eroding over time. But due to its longevity, able to live for about 200 years, resistance to insects and fire blight, and larger size, it could have potential and use for breeding purposes. In the US, Asian Pairs were released and were crossbred with the common pair. The hybrids were not high quality, but were more disease resistant, especially to fire blight. And control crosses were made later on using these hybrids in hopes of combining the high fruit quality with disease resistance. Cold-hardy cultivars were also introduced to North America from Russia in 1879. These trees had poor fruit quality and were susceptible to fire blight, but they proved useful in adding cold hardiness to new cultivars. With the introduction of Pears bursarensis, even more cold-hardy hybrids were bred. This happened by accident through chance selections of hybrids between the latter species and the common pair. Asian pairs were introduced in full force in the 1900s, and those species had superior fire blight resistance. This caused the USDA to breed specifically for fire blight resistance, and in recent years, South America, Australia, New Zealand, and Africa were breeding brand new varieties of pear. But the current variety, Packman's Triumph, is still important in New Zealand and Australia. Next, let's talk about current breeding. In European pears, the traits being bred for are the buttery smooth flavor typically found in an Basque or Anjou pear, much like the ancient Belgian groups. In Asian pear, they're breeding for crispness and sweet flavor. There is also heavy breeding for disease resistance. In European pears, they're breeding for pear cilia resistance, alongside resistance to scab, powdery mildew, and leaf spot. In Asian pears, they're breeding for leaf spot and scab, as well as Asian pear scab resistance, alongside the disease, pear rust. There's also heavy breeding going on in pear rootstock production. The common goal right now is size control and increased precocity in the Scion variety. And in Chinese and Japanese breeding programs, rootstocks that have resistance to the physiological disorder blackened are also being produced. Much of the effort that was done improving quince rootstocks for pear production has been replaced with dwarfing rootstocks of pears. This is due to reduced compatibility issues, and Pears species are more winter hardy than quince species. In North America, most of the pear breeding is happening in the USDA research station in West Virginia. In Canada, most of the pear research is happening in Haro Research Station. That's where most of the pear breeding is happening right now in Ontario. In Asia, there are major breeding programs in 3 provinces in China, 1 research station in South Korea, 1 research station in Taiwan, and 1 research station within Japan. In the South, New Zealand does most of the research in pear production. This concludes the pear episode, and next we'll move on to apricots. See you then.